Two, one.
Welcome. The Ayn Rand Center UK, as Razi very cleverly said yesterday, is an equal opportunity organization. So yesterday we criticized radical Islam. Today we're going to criticize another religion. And this is not one of these, all religions are the same. It just happened that we have two consecutive episodes somehow related on religion. So there is a very popular video by PragerU, which is called "Was America Founded to be Secular?" It has almost 1 million views if you add the views of the site, the views on YouTube. And also we are on times where the conservatives are in a way cashing in and doubling down on the culture wars. We see, for example, what's happening in Texas. They get psyched about the idea of making a comeback on the culture wars with abortion, but that's another issue. But part of this narrative, and very strong part of the narrative, is that we got US history wrong, that actually the United States is first and foremost a Christian state based on Christian values, or others call it Judeo-Christian values. And therefore, because we have forgotten this, we are in such a moral and social crisis today. And part of this crisis is also promiscuity, and that's why they see that quite often they frame even the abortion debates within this moral crisis. Now, we're going to do the fact check from this. So as we do always with good quality, we're going to steel man their argument. So we're going to find the best that their argument has to offer. And to try to check this argument, we have someone who knows history way better than any one of us does, James Valiant. So James is someone who helps us, not helps us, helps us is I wouldn't say, he's our in-house, let's say, experts in not only objectives, but also the history of the movement, but also history in general. He's interested in Roman history. He's interested in American history. So we're very happy to have him because he can help us with his expertise in so many issues. So James, thank you so much for being.
That was very, very nice. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can see behind him his books, Creating Christ and The Passion of Ayn Rand Critics, both books based on history and how history can make us understand some things. And I would say even justice, how history can serve justice. So let's jump straight into it. So the conservatives are basically making two different claims. The one is the historical claim, and the other is the moral claim. I want to start with the historical claim, and I'm going to give you, James, the main aspects of it. Again, trying to steal money. So the historical case is first and foremost, the colonists were mostly social conservatives, and many of them were actually Puritans who just wanted to go on with the way of life they've had. And this means that the American Revolution was not really a revolution, not a social revolution. It was mostly a defense to a way of life that they already had. And Judeo-Christian values were very central to that way of life, and that's what they wanted to defend. So what's your take on this very prominent, let's say, revisionist history argument?
Well, first, it is become an axiom among the right, especially in this country, in America, to believe that the Bible, in effect, is a founding document, like our Constitution or Declaration of Independence. And they give it that status as if the Bible is what primarily informs, Judeo-Christian values is what primarily informs the ideas that founded America. This is historically false. This is obviously historically false on the face of it. All you have to do is look at the Bible and look at the American founding documents to know that's not true. The American Revolution, in one sense, did represent ordinary people standing up for their liberty, but it was a revolution, a social revolution. We eliminated at the time of the revolution, for example, entail, property that could be sent only to the eldest son, an airline like England's dukes, earls succeed to their property. We eliminated entail. We eliminated primogeniture. All the children, male, female, regardless of birth order, inherit intestate the same as any others do. Maybe most revolutionary is this issue right here: separation of church and state. Every country in Europe, every country in the world had an official religion, a religion that gave moral legitimacy to the government. And it was a religion that uniformly gave its moral legitimacy and basis to the government. To this day, Great Britain has an official state church, the Church of England. Not all countries in Europe do. The Republic of France, for example, eliminated that idea. But the whole idea of American government at the Revolution was secular government, the separation of religion and state, thoroughly and completely. The specific historical experience in America was that some of the original English and Dutch colonists here were, in fact, Puritans, were in fact religious extremists. And when they colonized, for example, Massachusetts originally, they turned it into a theocracy, into a real religious dictatorship. That was a miserable failure. It collapsed. There were people who left Massachusetts, went out to Connecticut and Rhode Island to found more secular states with more religious freedom. The idea that, for example, religious minorities who were being persecuted in Europe, extreme Protestants, for example, could find a refuge here is an absolute fact. So certain groups, there's certain religions that started in Europe, which are no longer there, but came to America and still exist here, for example. So religious minorities who were under persecution in Europe sure did come to America to find freedom, but it was freedom to do their own distinct religion, not to impose their religion on others. That was the idea at the time of the Revolution. More than that, you can scour the Hebrew and Christian Bibles from one end to the other. You will never find a doctrine of rights, individual rights, or any other kind of natural human rights. There's no freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of press. In fact, individuals have no rights whatever. Slavery is endorsed. God commands the genocide, including of children, slaves, animals, repeatedly in the Bible. No, a hereditary monarchy is what Europeans got from the Bible. Jesus, for example, is descended from these Jewish kings from David. He was an anointed king. That is why European kings, insofar as there are still monarchs in Europe, are anointed. They're anointed like biblical Davidic kings. Monarchy is what Europe got from the Bible for the better part of the last 2,000 years. So no, somehow we had to wait until the Enlightenment for ideas like freedom of speech and freedom of religion to even become current ideas. The United States is not.
But a question on that, sure. Because again, I want to steelman the argument. If
Right.
you ask a good conservative historian, look, if you claim that the basis of the miracle quote of United States was Judeo-Christian values, why didn't it happen in Middle Ages Europe? What would they say on that?
It's a funny thing. Religious ethics are supposed to be absolute and immutable. They're objective because they come from God is basically the answer. But then you give them, for example, the examples I gave. Christians burned other Christians at the stake out of Christian love and tortured them out of Christian love for most of their ruling history. So they're, no, our morals have evolved. You can't judge the Bible's defense of slavery or God's commands of genocide in our moral context. Well, wait. So much for the immutable values of God, right? The immutable morals of God. No, human rights wasn't even an idea as we understand it until the Age of Reason and Enlightenment. The development between the Hugo Grotius and John Locke, that was the revolution that gave the West good arguments against slavery, good arguments for individual freedom, including property rights. And until the 17th and 18th centuries, no Christian, it never even occurred to Christians, because the exact opposite doctrine is what you actually find in the Bible. Now, to help steelman their argument, it is true. Let me give them the devil his due there. The truth is that Islam today is in a dark age. I would not compare Islamic culture to Christian culture today. No. What Christianity was 1,000, 1,500 years ago is what Islam is going through now. is what Islam is going through now. So there's a radical difference. And Christianity has changed. That's the key. Most Christians in the 21st century or 20th century would not even recognize what it was to be a Christian 300 years ago. If you belong to my sect, you are going to hell, period. You are going to hell and burn in hell. Christians have modified their views, ignored text, cherry-picked their text now for the last 2 or 3 centuries, so that Christianity itself is perceived in a totally different way than it was perceived a mere 200 or 300 years ago, much to the benefit of Christian culture. Now, religion is still the enemy element. It's still the opposite, the part of Christianity that is our foe here. You cannot ground liberty in mysticism. That is not a solid basis. And that's just for openers. You can't ground capitalism in altruism. And they're still deeply mired in altruist ethics.
We'll get to that. We'll get to the moral point. But let's finish with the historical point. So the second historical point where they would say that we get it wrong and the dominant narrative gets it wrong. So they would say founding fathers not only were religious themselves, but they were also believing that only a religious populace, a religious people, could sustain freedom. Is this historically accurate? Yes or no?
Well, no, most of the great founding fathers were not Christians. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. To my reading of Ben Franklin, he was not a Christian. No. They were deists. Many of the great ideologues behind the American Revolution rejected an active Christian God operating in the universe and believed in only the vague idea that some impersonal creator immovable mover like Aristotle's may have started the whole thing, but he doesn't intervene in human life. The universe is governed by Newtonian physics and nature. By this point, American Enlightenment thinkers, I mean, Jefferson's heroes were Newton, Bacon, and Locke. Jefferson wrote he was a polyglot. He knew great Greek. He did his own translation of the New Testament where he cut out all the miracles. You know, that's all nonsense. But it does reveal something. He left in the moral philosophy. They may have rejected the metaphysics. They may have rejected certain aspects of Christianity, but there is something about the core of morality that they still retained. And I will concede that to the conservatives. What the founding fathers lacked was a consistent moral code. Thomas Jefferson, inspired by philosophers like John Locke, could say that every individual has the equal right to pursue his own happiness. That's an implicitly egoistic idea that flies in the face of Christian altruism. Nonetheless, people like Jefferson himself, although not an atheist, but certainly not a Christian, Thomas Jefferson, our third president and the author of the Declaration of Independence, was no Christian, but still believed to some degree in the moral idealism of Jesus. And this was the philosophical contradiction that lay at the heart of the American Revolution. I will concede that much. But the founding fathers existed in America were maybe the most secular time in American history. The founding fathers...
Sorry, you mentioned Jefferson, and the PragerU video has this quote from Jefferson which says, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God and that they're not to be violated but with his wrath?"
Okay, Jefferson there is, again, he's not an atheist, but he's also not a Christian there. And it's very important to note that. Jefferson did not have an ethics like objectivism to answer Christian ethics with. All of them believed that, in other words, the assumption was that there is an element of moral idealism to be found in Christianity that we can't let go of, that free people must also be a moral, civilized, educated people. That is a constant theme of the American founding fathers. Even a conservative founding father, a federalist like John Adams, one of the first treaties he signed with the Muslim pirates, for example, was said specifically, America is not founded on any kind of religion. We're not a religious country. One of America's very first treaties explicitly states from one of our more conservative founding fathers, we're not a religious country. So we have no problem with Muslims, Jews, Christians, you name it. George Washington went out of his way to speak at different for different religious groups, Jewish groups, very, very odd Protestant groups. There is no religious group that George Washington didn't reach out to equally. No, the American Republic was founded much more on pre-Christian pagan ideas found in ancient Rome and Athens. The ancient Roman Republic, which fell apart in the 1st century BC, before Christ, the Republic of Rome had already fallen apart. But that was the model for the founding fathers. They wanted to create a republic that was not vulnerable like the Roman Republic, but it was very much based on the Roman Republic. There were 2 executive officers, a president and a vice president, just like the Roman Republic had 2 consuls, a senate, a popular assembly, officers with veto power over legislation. No, the very terminology that we use, like Senate and veto, in the framing of this country, the very political institutions were based on pagan, pre-Christian Roman institutions. They were based on natural rights theory that does go back to Locke, who was a Christian, Thomas Aquinas before that with a general natural law idea, and that goes back to Aristotle. That's why Ayn Rand says Aristotle is America's first founding father, if you look at it consistently. But it clearly is the Hellenized world, the world of Greco-Roman philosophy and politics, that far more inspired the American founding fathers. If you go to Washington, D.C. today, you will not find Gothic cathedrals mostly. You will find whitewashed columns, classical columns of Neo-Grecian and Neo-Roman art, a specific aesthetic tribute to the democracy of Athens and the Republic of Rome, the pre-Christian pagan traditions that mostly informed the founding fathers, who were, by and large, anti-Christian. Our friends at PragerU leave out Thomas Jefferson's quotes about the relationship between religion and tyranny too. Thomas Jefferson believed that we really wouldn't have freedom until the last priest lost any kind of control or influence in politics. Jefferson specifically thought organized religion had a pernicious influence. More than that, it was the recent history of Europe in which Christians had been at each other's throats for centuries. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Protestants and Catholics were torturing at the stake, burning at the stake, torturing on the rack, people who did not believe in them. If you were in a Catholic country, Protestants got it. If you were in a Protestant country like England, Catholics got it. So they were killing and torturing other variant Christians throughout the 16th century, through much of the 17th century. They were doing that. And it was that, the 30 Years' War in Germany, they were inventing new torture devices to slowly torture their religious political enemies. And so the bloodbath between Christians in Europe is what specifically informed secular government in America. We don't want that. There's nothing in the Bible, for example, that doesn't say we shouldn't have dictatorship. If you read the New Testament, Romans 13, obey the state as God's appointed agents on earth. It is a sin to not pay your taxes. You don't pay your taxes just to practically get along. No. You don't rebel, because rebellion is a sin.
That the don't threaten me and Christianity, people who are in both things, they have to choose it's one or the other. It can't be both.
Louis XIV cited Romans 13 for his absolute monarchy. Every Christian theology, every Christian monarch, every Christian dictator through the course of most of Christian history has cited the Bible. Look, the founding fathers had to violate every single principle in the New Testament simply to do the revolution. Jesus said, submit to the evildoer, love your enemy, turn the other cheek to any physical aggression. There is nothing in Jesus's doctrine, which is perfectly consistent in this regard, by the way, which permits revolution at all. Slaves, obey your masters, even harsh ones, because that's a great salvation opportunity. You'll get points in the next life, in your afterlife, if you're really tormented here as a slave. So slavery with a harsh master is a salvation opportunity to be relished. So, for example, slave owners into the 19th century all cited the repeated endorsements of slavery you find in both the Old and New Testaments. The Old and New Testaments.
Sorry, here they would say, though, that the School of Salamanca, for example, which were also religious people, were the first who revolted against the idea of slavery. So they would say, the root of trying to get rid of slavery also lies in Christianity.
Well, it began as we shouldn't do this to other Christians. And so, for example, in the 15th century, the Pope gave a full green light to enslaving any Africans, pagans, Native Americans. Go for it, European colonists, because these guys can be enslaved. The doctrine began, well, we shouldn't be doing this to other Christians. Just as in the Old Testament, Jewish slaves could not be held by other Jews for an extended period of time. At the year of Jubilee, Jewish slaves were freed and foreign captives could remain slaves forever. So the same doctrine began to occur in Christianity. We can't enslave other Christians. That would be wrong. The notion then spread out from that maybe slavery is wrong. But frankly, the official Christian doctrine was in favor of slavery. The Church of England, the Catholic Church, endorsed slavery into the 19th century. Now, there are Christians who were criticizing slavery.
Let's have a pause here because I want to read some super chats, but I don't want to put you on the spot at the end. So try and think, because I'm going to ask you at the end, James, if you can give us 2 or 3 sources that you think are, so someone who has no idea about the American Revolution and they want to read, let's say, 2 or 3 books. What would these books be? But before we get there, because I have a series of more questions, I'm going to accelerate a bit the process because there are many more things I want your take on.
Okay.
But let's make a pause for super chat. So Jonathan, thank you. Kirk says James Valiant is the man. No disagreement here. And another super chat, shout out to James. So James, you, our audience, we are not only appreciate you, but also the audience enjoys your contribution. So that's good. So let's go now to their moral points. So because they could say, okay, maybe, who knows what happened in history, but now we go to the important stuff, which is the moral points. So they would say, look, the Declaration of Independence says, these rights are endowed to us by the Creator. And therefore, how can you say that we can sustain freedom, that freedom was not based on religion, when the founding document says that the rights are endowed by the Creator? Checkmate, secularists. What would you say?
What the framers meant there was that people are so constructed as to have these rights, that it is right for people to have the equal, recognized equal legal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The inclusion of God there, and you'll notice that the Declaration of Independence goes out of its way to modify the concept of God with a very interesting adjective, nature's God. And at the end, it refers to the vaguest notion of the deity, providence. So it is perfectly consistent with a deist view as it is with a Christian view. There's nothing specifically Christian and there's nothing specifically Jewish about that. It is true that John Locke was a Christian who, some 90 years before the American Revolution, did develop a doctrine of rights, but he had to repair to pagan ideas like Aristotle's natural law, because Christianity itself was an insufficient basis even for Locke to come a Christian Locke. But look, it took 1700 years for any Christian to even come up with Locke's argument against slavery, which is a natural rights argument. Human nature is what requires freedom. It's not like some God coming along with a magic wand and dubbing us with some, or some pixie dust. Or as Leonard Peikoff likes to say, it's not like a coat of paint or rights that can be removed. Because if it can be given by God, it can be taken away just as easily by God. If God is the authority on what these rights are, then God is the limitation on what those rights are. And it is our revelation of God, our mystical, unaccountable revelation of what God is telling us about these rights. No, it's what nature and observation and science are telling us about human nature. Humans thrive under freedom. Ayn Rand went so far as to figure out why that's the case. The mind is our only means of knowledge. It's our basic tool of survival. And therefore, human beings as a biological organism will thrive and prosper under freedom. So it's a completely naturalistic scientific argument that in effect was found there. They used the Creator in the most vague way possible. That's nature's God. God has constructed, or the creator, or we've been created such that, I know it's already a compromise with a teleological argument, but that's the irrelevant point. That's the non-essential. The essential here is what it's saying is that humans are so constructed as to require freedom for their happiness.
It's
That's the argument.
It's part of the identity of being a human being that you need that you need freedom from coercion.
Right. Whereas if it was just from God, it could just be an arbitrary, it could be taken away tomorrow by God, right?
So you mentioned limitations, and this is very big in the conservative narrative, particularly these days, again, with abortion. They say, oh, you just want to be unhinged, and this means that you don't. So without the limitations of religion, you get unhinged. So here's what the Prager video says. And again, we're talking about a video which is called Was America founded to be secular? It's not a new video, but it is relevant. So at some other point, the guy says, liberty comes with moral demands. And actually, they say the founders knew that the absolute enemy of freedom was, ironically, a freedom that was absolute and unrestrained. Let me repeat that. The absolute enemy of freedom was a freedom that was absolute and unrestrained. So what do you say to that, James? That the only way for freedom to have meaning is through the responsibilities, and many people like Jordan Peterson talk all the time about this, rights come with duties and these come with responsibilities. Do you think this is a valid formulation?
No, it is not. It is a contradiction of Jefferson and Locke's entire approach. To Thomas Jefferson and John Locke, a good law does not restrict liberty. It only protects liberty. If a law is restraining me from coercing you, then that very law is protecting freedom. It doesn't restrict freedom. My freedom to engage in force, my freedom to destroy freedom, is not freedom at all. So murder laws, theft laws, valid laws, which are designed to protect other individual rights, are not restrictions of freedom. They are maximizers of freedom. They are protectors of freedom. The rule of law, at some level, is the precondition of freedom. So no, when they want to go beyond that and have abortion laws and so forth, and school prayer laws, or inject Christianity into the education system, no, they're the ones who are engaged in a rights violation, injecting force into the situation, right? So on the other hand, I want to come to their defense in one point. Freedom does require an educated moral populace. One of in my view, the greatest flaw of the new atheists, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Dawkins, you name it, the late Christopher Hitchens, they were weak on ethics. Until we get a firm, objective, secularly grounded, natural ethics, there's really not going to be a good answer to this. That's, of course, what Ayn Rand gives us. And that's why Ayn Rand really is the completion, in effect, of the American Revolution. She gives it a moral foundation.
Ayn Rand mentions in The New Intellectual the irony of people who are supposedly, again, the witch doctor, as he calls it, which it's related to religion. So she talks about scientists who want supposedly to oppose the witch doctor, and all they do is they reach the same moral premises of the witch doctor, but now with a scientific method. And when I read this the other day, I was like, oh, she's talking 30 years, 40 years before the new atheist. She's talking about the new atheist. We say, yeah, effective altruism, but I came to it with a different way. Or, yeah, we have to, we have to help it. So they reach the same conclusions, but technically now with a scientific method. So they say to the witch doctor, you were right, but you didn't really know why you were right.
Right. And the most a Sam Harris will do is be pure subjectivist. It boils down to our emotions. And unless they can do better than that, religion will persist. Since the days of David Hume, no serious thinker has taken the idea of God seriously in the sense that it's logically necessary or proven. So why does religion persist? Religion persists because secular philosophers have not provided an alternative to religious ethics. The religious have had a monopoly on the field of morality for so long, and people can't get out of their heads the idea that some of these notions are moral idealism, like Christian altruism, which is pure evil as far as I'm concerned. Pure evil. And until they realize, I mean, for example, ordinary self-defense wasn't even possible to a Christian morally. They understood, St. Augustine, right, writing 1500 years ago, said a Christian cannot defend himself even when a madman is coming at him with a knife. Even what we would call reasonable self-defense. Turn the other cheek, submit to the evildoer. Jesus meant what he said. It wasn't until the 13th century and Thomas Aquinas who said, no, ordinary Christians can defend themselves. That's part of look at animals, look at other people. Using observation and natural law, Aristotelian thinking, he allowed the Christian laity to engage in reasonable self-defense, morally. The clergy couldn't. If you're a priest or a nun or something, you've still got to sit and take it and be killed by the monster. But if you're a Christian laity, you can fight back. But that took to the 13th century just to get that. Imagine how far the founding fathers came in having a revolution. No, Jesus said, pay your taxes. Paul said, pay your taxes all over the New Testament. Render unto Caesar, pay your taxes. It's a sin not to pay your taxes. Jesus befriended tax collectors. The whole idea of a political revolution, which Jesus opposed, based on not paying your taxes, which Jesus supported, is absolutely insane.
But wait,
no
here
idea.
they would say, though, Jesus entered the temple and literally turned the tables of who were these powers to be there.
The Jewish authorities. When Jesus is doing that, the Jewish extremists are fighting a war with Rome. Jesus is taking Rome's side. The Romans would destroy that temple, and Jesus' story of doing that was only written after the Romans destroyed the temple. So it was written, in my view, recreating Christ, in my view, that whole entire story is designed to justify the Roman destruction of that temple. So Christianity, and my theory is that an important motivation for Christianity was the Jewish war of the first century, and that the New Testament represents, in effect, a critical reaction to the rebel ideologues. And so it's pro-Roman political propaganda. And you can find, drop your finger at random in the New Testament, and you'll find, in effect, what is anti-rebel, anti-Jewish extremist ideology. Jesus' foes throughout the New Testament are Jewish religious authorities. The Roman government declared Jesus to be innocent. They wouldn't have crucified Jesus, but for a crowd of Jewish people in front of Pilate 3 times demanding Jesus' crucifixion, or they would rebel right there. Finally, Pilate relents. The entire thing is a political allegory that says submit to Rome at a time of Jewish messianic rebellion. So the founding fathers had to violate every moral precept in the New Testament just to do the American Revolution.
This leads me to the last question, which is quite often we hear people like Ben Shapiro use the term or Prager himself, Judeo-Christian values. Now, I have the experience of Greece where you get a lot of Greek nationalists who don't really know history or who change history, and they want to portray the Byzantine Empire as the continuation of ancient Greece. So they say Greece has a line: ancient Greece, Byzantine Empire, modern Greece. And the obvious question is, but wait a minute, the Byzantine Empire, part of its identity was destroying, denying, hiding even the existence of ancient Greek philosophy. So isn't it a bit weird by talking about Byzantine Greek or Greek Orthodox tradition? Now,
it is obscene. There's nothing less than obscene in my view. It's true that the Western Roman Empire fell 1,500 years ago. Barbarians invaded, it was shattered, it was broken into small anarchistic regions for a long time. In the East, in what is today Greece and Turkey and much of the Balkans, and indeed for a while the Middle East itself was dominated still, the Eastern Roman Empire, by Christian governments. Now, although they didn't collapse to the face of barbarians like the West did, they engaged in what can only be described as a self-inflicted lobotomy of Greek culture. The examples are numerous. None of Aristotle's dialogues survive. Cicero, the first century Roman writer, said that they were liquid gold, superior, more beautiful than Plato's dialogues. None of them survive. Most of Aristotle's Poetics does not survive. Archimedes' method, where he was actually on the verge of discovering calculus, was only discovered in an outline palimpsest form because, these Byzantine Christians, rather than preserving the works of Aristotle and Archimedes, the greatest scientists of the ancient world, they bleached out the pages. Rather than copying and preserving those important works, they bleached the pages out, turned them around, and then wrote some Christian prayer book or hymn book on it. Yeah, another goddamn Christian prayer book is what we needed. Another of the 1,000 Christian prayer books that the Byzantines produced. And in the meantime, the most important scientists of the ancient world had their most important works completely evaporate, disappeared. We're still learning how much we were forgotten. The Byzantines cut their own heads off and destroyed Greek culture, in my humble opinion.
I agree with that. But the question is, in the same way as it doesn't really make sense to talk about Greco-Byzantine civilization, because it's kind of the one is opposite of that. What do you make? And I have zero knowledge on that, so I'm asking you on good faith. Does it make sense to talk about Judeo-Christian values or Judeo-Christian civilization? So,
oh yeah, I mean, people will point to, hey, and this is the most common sense argument.
And if I'm allowed to finish, why I'm asking this, because in my mind, the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's different tone there, to put it mildly. So, so what's the relationship between the two then?
Well, first, I'd like to back up. The best argument to really steelman their argument, to give them a factual foothold, at least, of some sort, there is no doubt that, for example, murder laws and theft laws are fundamental to civilization, and America certainly had murder and theft laws. But the idea that that comes uniquely, that morality or decent law comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition, is just wrong. Pagan Greeks, pagan Romans also had laws against murder and theft. They also had that in ancient Indian and Chinese civilizations and the ancient Egyptian civilization. In fact, any enduring civilization were those civilizations that had rules against murder and theft. So those are ubiquitous, and Judeo-Christian values deserve no specific credit for that. Now look at the Old Testament. The Hebrew scriptures is a nationalistic doctrine. It is an ethnocentric doctrine, God's chosen people. We are God's chosen people, and we have a special role to play in that regard. And their rules are very, very strict. There's no question. It's very hard to be admitted in. God, the God of the Old Testament, is a ruthless God who enforces justice. The time of Noah's flood, for example, he wipes out everyone but Noah. He creates mankind only a few generations later to wipe them all out off the face of the earth except Noah and his family because of sin. As I say, God commands genocides be performed by the Jews repeatedly through the course of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is a vengeful God, but at least he's a God of justice. He believed in a justice rule that said eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Jesus comes along in the New Testament and modifies that further. He says, no. No eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We submit to the evildoer. We turn the other cheek to physical aggression. You've heard it say that thou shalt not kill. I tell you, anyone who is angry in their heart has already sinned. So we have thought crimes, emotion crimes in Jesus. None of us we can't even lust in our, you've heard it say, thou shalt not commit adultery. I say to you, anyone who has lust in their heart has already sinned. Every day that passes, most humans are sinning, right? So you can't avoid sinning in Christianity. So Jesus amplifies Mosaic law, ignores some of it. He says you don't have to worry about strict Sabbath or kosher diet anymore because that was in there too. God endorsed slavery in the Hebrew scriptures, but he didn't want you to eat shellfish. That was really important for God. He couldn't outlaw slavery, but he could tell you not to eat lobster or pork. But the New Testament doesn't do any better. It endorses the Old Testament's view about executing gays, executing blasphemers, slaves submitting to harsh masters, and so forth. No, in one sense, it tells you to submit to dictatorship. The exact opposite of the Founding Fathers' ideology. So it gets worse. Christianity actually steps away from what was originally a more just idea, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. At least a concept of proportionate justice was involved in Hebrew scripture. In the New Testament, it is simply submit to the evildoer, no matter what is being dished out at you. And that, of course, just sanctions dictatorship. And that's, for most of the last 2,000 years, what Christians have been doing, sanctioning dictatorship.
James, it's impossible to have a discussion with you that could not have gone for hours and hours. But for further reading, so to speak, I will come back to the question I asked in the middle. So if you could pick 2 or 3 books that give someone an understanding either of the revolution or, let's say, the long history of the colonies and then of the United States and of the revolution, so of that period, so to speak, what would be your suggestions?
Bernard Bailyn wrote an excellent book on the ideology of the founding fathers, the ideology of the American Revolution. The name of the book is, it slips my mind right now, but Bernard,
what's
the
name
ideological
of the guy?
origin, I think Bernard Bailyn, Bailyn. The ideological origins, I believe, of the American Revolution is the name of the book.
Okay,
it's
so the
cited
book
by
is
Leonard Peikoff.
the ideological origins of the American Revolution.
I think that's what it's titled.
Bernard Bailyn, yeah.
Exactly. It's an outstanding book, and it really gets into the real ideological origins of the American Revolution, despite what modern conservatives may think. Another book, of course, that I would recommend is Dr. Leonard Peikoff's brilliant The Ominous Parallels. Simply the comparison of American culture, especially in the founding era and the 19th century, to what America is today and what became of German culture as a result of Kant and Hegel and then the rise of Nazism. That comparison is a brilliant one because it actually shows the relationship between mysticism and altruism and how that one leads to dictatorship and how another led to America's golden age, in effect. So just a chapter from The Ominous Parallels, The Nation of the Enlightenment, the chapter about the founding of America, is worth the entire price of admission right there. There are all kinds of other good books. I might recommend my own article for the Objective Standard that I published a few years ago, The American Revolution versus the New Testament. And that's
all right. I didn't realize that you have actually written on this.
No,
topic.
specifically on this point, the American Revolution versus the New Testament in the Objective Standard. It was 3 or 4 years ago, I think, it was published.
So when I said when I was a bit hesitant to call you an expert on the topic because I didn't want to put you on the spot. Turns out you have actually on the topic. So check out. I mean, I
that's a
think
good
if people
start.
Google Objective Standard and James Valiant American Revolution, they will find it. Also, I haven't read it, but I assume C. Bradley Thompson's American Revolutionary Mind, a moral.
How could I have forgotten that? How could I have forgotten that? I've recently just been blown away by Brad Thompson's amazing book on the founding period. That now may be the state of the art. How could that have slipped my mind? Blew my mind away. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommended it, and it may be the state of the art now on this topic of what the ideas were and the culture was that really was behind the American Revolution. Yes, good. Yes, so, yes.
James, do you know Clubhouse? You are on Clubhouse, right?
I've downloaded it on my phone, but it never seems to work for me. So I'm a bit technically challenged. So maybe all I need to do is get one of my tech nerd friends to help me.
So we will move. We don't know if James will make it, but we're going to move to Clubhouse for 15 minutes or so. Okay, last announcements before we say goodbye. So next Thursday at 7 o'clock, 2 p.m. Eastern time, we have a new show, the premiere of Everything Parenting with Lisa Van Dam. So we had Lisa Van Dam for one Q&A on parenting. It created a lot of enthusiasm and you wanted the second Q&A. We did the second Q&A. So we thought, and when I say we, I mean Razi, who is the ambitious mastermind behind everything new we do. So Razi thought, why not try to have Lisa do a show for us? So this will happen starting next Thursday, Everything Parenting with Lisa Van Dam. If you're a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, except from the fact that you help us do all these things, you can send your questions to Lisa in advance. So you have this privilege. And tonight, 10 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, Live on Earth with Robert Nasir. Robert was in Ocon. Ocon finished yesterday. It was a great experience. So he's going to give us some of that Ocon energy. So let's move to Clubhouse for the next 50 minutes. James, thanks so much.
Sure.
Members know that we reconvene with James on Saturday because we discuss the peak of courses. We're finishing objectives through induction. I don't know what's the next course we're gonna do, but
Moral virtue, perhaps?
What?
Moral virtue, I think, at least is tentatively next on schedule, right? And after that, I hope, understanding objectivism.
Oh, okay. Well, who knows? We'll see. I don't
Okay,
know.
okay. But we've covered the art of thinking and objectivism through induction so far, and we've got more.
We've done the art of thinking, and again, you do these courses and you say, "Oh, I thought I know objectivism, but now I realize that there's more stuff." But also, it's a fun thing because what we do on the Saturday courses is we constantly try to think, how does this apply to my life? How does this apply to my flourishing, to pursuing my values? Okay, one of the longest episodes ever. We need to put a pause. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, James, and talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.